For almost 40 years, Dick the Bruiser has grappled his way across the wrestling mats of America and Japan. The legendary world's most dangerous wrestler isn't really that dangerous at his Northside Indianapolis home, but does still step in the ring from time to time when he's not color commentating or cutting commercials. To his fans, the Bruiser always has a snarl on his face, is always ready for battle.
Because I've been in these battles.
But to his friends and family, Dick Apholis is as genuine as they come. And as we found out recently, with Dick the Bruiser, what you see is what you get.
Take my hand, my beautiful woman.
Dick, thanks for having us here today. Your name, Dick the Bruiser, is legendary in wrestling, and a lot of people may not realize it, but you're still wrestling today, among doing other things. How has the profession changed today as compared to when you started wrestling in the 50s?
Well, when I started wrestling in the 50s, it's exactly like it is today. There was a lot of show business. In fact, that's how I became popular in wrestling, Karen. There was a lot of show business in wrestling. That was Gorgeous George era. And he had curls, and he would come out and throw gold hair clips at people. And all the wrestlers followed his lead. They all had big fancy robes, and they all had fancy pants, and they all had fancy hairdos. And then along came Dick the Bruiser in the middle 1950s, and all that dumbbell had was an old pair of tights and some shoes that he bought at any sporting goods store, and that was the complete things that I used, other than a good fist and a punch in the nose and a kick in the pants. That was what was different. I came out and everybody said, "What's that half-wit doing out there? He hasn't got any." I had a hair crew cut just like I wear now. He doesn't have any show business. And then I'd go ahead and beat up these guys so bad they'd say, "By golly, he's got something. He really goes after."
Did you do that intentionally? No pomp and
I was
circumstance?
playing at Green Bay at the time, and I just continued the way I felt.
You talk about playing for Green Bay. That's the Green Bay Packers. Of course, you played with them for about 5 years.
That's right.
How did pro football compare to pro wrestling?
It's about the same. The only thing different in pro football and pro wrestling, once the season starts, in pro football, you've got a week to recuperate from your Sunday's actions. Whatever you get injured, why you can kind of nurse and take it easy until the next Sunday. And in pro wrestling, you get hurt, you get injured. Sometimes you wrestle every day for a week at a time, or sometimes every other day. So the only real difference, body-wise, is that you don't have the time to recuperate in pro wrestling.
So you still wrestle today, but as compared to your heyday, what's the difference?
I wrestle maybe when I'm really out on the road wrestling all over the world. I'll wrestle maybe 3 times a week. Compared, I used to wrestle, sometimes I'd wrestle 6, 7, 8 times a week.
How in the world did you ever get started in pro wrestling?
Well, I went to Purdue and I wrestled in high school, and I had an athletic scholarship to Purdue where I was only able, in other words, if I took the scholarship, they would only let me play football. But I worked out with a wrestling team all the time and loved wrestling, but I couldn't wrestle on the team. So I wrestled at Purdue, only just worked out with the fellas. And then from Purdue, I went to University of Nevada. And when my class graduated at Purdue, I was able to start playing football in the late 1950s.
So you played for the Green Bay Packers, and at that time you made about $6,000 a year.
Yes, I thought it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I was a captain of the line, and making the average lineman, that was about an average lineman's salary. The minimum was $4,000. Now the minimum's about $60,000 or $70,000. And I made $4,000 my first year. And then I really got big raises, about 500 every year. And I was, anyway, the last couple of years, 6,000, 6,500. And I thought, oh boy, I was making more money than anybody in the world. And I just loved it. And we traveled and worked as hard as they do today. And it was, if I may say so, Karen, these football players, we had rules that they would be so hurt, and they just couldn't take it. Like, for instance, when I first started playing, they had a rule where you had to hold the man down for at least 1 second without any forward movement. In other words, when you tackle a ball carrier, the guy had to stay in without forward movement for 1 second. Then that was a down. And so what would happen was that you'd tackle a guy, and then everybody would pile on trying to hold that guy down, because if you tackle him, his knees hit the ground, he'd fall on down, and as long as he kept wiggling or crawling or doing something to get forward motion, there wasn't an end of the down. Most people don't know that.
No.
Then, Karen, I also played in an era where they didn't have to have nose guards. And in 53, I think it was, 52 or 53, the nose guards came in. And it was levied that you had to have nose guards on the helmet. Well, a lot of good that did me, because all my teeth were already knocked out.
It was too
late.
late.
It used to make me mad to think that these big sissies that I'm playing against are sitting there with all their teeth, and I got no teeth, and I had to wear a nose guard when I wasn't used to it.
So what do you think of today's NFL? You see all these contract disputes as compared to when you played.
They're great players, and they're big, and they're strong. We had the same big 6'8" players. When I played, I'm 6 foot. I was the shortest tackle in the league when I played, 6 foot. But there were plenty of 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", 6'8" tackles, and the only thing that are really bigger now than when I played is the guards are bigger. The guards now are as big as tackles. When I was a tackle and a guard. But the men are beautiful, and they've got them conditioned and everything, except when they get hurt, they're kind of crybabies, I think. You know, and plus when I played, we only had 33 men on a team. There were only 12 teams, 33 men on a team. Everybody was back from the Second World War. When I started playing at Green Bay, I was 20 years old, and I was the youngest guy on the team, and I was the only guy illegally drinking beer. Can you imagine that? Oh boy! And we were owned by the Miller Brewing Company. Karen.
That's right, you were.
And after a game, thank God they had post game. Anyway, they would bring in a whole horse trough of beer, and the Green Bay team would go out so drunk after a game that we didn't know who we were, whether we won or lost.
So it's a myth that you were kicked out of the league. That's what the story.
The stories are wrong. The reason I left the league, I loved to play football. I was signed for the 1955 season and started, and then I had made so much. I started wrestling on and off in 52, and in 55, instead of going back full time, I started, and I made more in a half a season, twice as much in half a season I did playing a full season of football, wrestling. Mm-hmm. So I thought, oh, this just doesn't make sense. I mean, I've only been to college 7 or 8 years, and I can figure out that 15,000 in 6 months is better than 6,000 in 6 months. Which then the other 6, I went back, and I was going back to Reno, Nevada. I went to school at the University of Nevada trying to get my degree, and I also worked for 6 years while I played ball. I went to school, like I've been to college about 10 or 15 years. But I went to school, and I also worked as a head security officer at Harold's Club, the world's biggest gambling club in Reno, Nevada. When I wasn't going to school, I only took about 4 hours a semester, so it wasn't too heavy for me.
You talked a little bit about wrestling today and how you think it's pretty much the same today as it was.
Pretty much the same. Like today, it goes through cycles. Today is back to the showmanship era, where 99% of the wrestlers are really, they've got, in fact, they've even gone beyond the showbiz era before I started, because about half of them wear makeup and all kinds of silly, which to me is silly, but I mean, these guys like it. To me, they're hiding behind facades, some kind of facial makeup, And
because a lot of people will say they liked wrestling better back in the days when you were big.
It really isn't any different other than the outfits they wear and the makeup. They've got big funny hairdos again, but the makeup's the only thing I can see different. George wore a little makeup, but these guys, you know, they have all kinds of exotic. In fact, I think some of them are quite cute. I think they'd make great exotic dancers, you know, and they could go topless and without even getting arrested. I think it'd be terrific.
So what do you think of Hulk Hogan? Is he a fierce competitor of yours, or do you admire his style, his marketing?
In fact, my company that I worked with and that I own part of, we started Hulk Hogan, and up until about 7, 8 years ago, he was my tag team partner. And we found him in a band. He was playing in an exotic nightclub as a band, and he was the drummer for a bunch of strippers.
So how did you figure out that he should be a wrestler?
He was working out with some of the wrestlers that worked for us. And they said, boy, he's strong and he seems athletically inclined. He wanted to get into wrestling. So I've got to give the man credit. He went, we taught him wrestling holds. He had never, I'll say another thing. Preface is, most, even today, most of the wrestlers that are successful have wrestled amateur in high school, then in college, and AAU, most of them.
So it's really not a good idea just to decide one day that you want to be a pro wrestler.
This fella made a transition from weightlifting, as I understand is about the only sport he ever indulged in, playing a drum, watching the girls, and then going, and we taught him wrestling, and he took to it like a duck to water. It made a very good success of himself, and he is a good wrestler, as good as anybody. And plus, you know, he tries to emulate the Bruiser, only he's taller than
everyone.
Yeah, right.
When I look at some of the wrestlers today, they look a lot more like bodybuilders, perhaps, than you guys in the past. Is there a problem at all with steroids in the business now? People thinking that that's the edge?
I've fought against steroids for years and years. In fact, the first men that I knew, I wasn't really that knowledgeable about steroids. I didn't really know what they were. I've weighed as much as 300 myself. I weigh 240, 242 now. But I've weighed as much, like when I played Green Bay, 300, and I've wrestled as high as 290, back and forth down. But I normally wrestle about 250. Can you imagine if I took steroids? We wouldn't be able to get in this yard with me. Steroids are fine for injuries. That's what they originally, like cortisones and those types, for injuries. But then the men started taking them because it's really a lot easier. You only have to work out about 1/4 as hard with steroids to get a muscle and to get weight and mass. About, I'd say on average, 1/4 as hard as you would if you didn't take steroids. So naturally, everybody wants to do it the easy way, right? Mm-hmm. Plus, they will bulk you up. Like, in other words, if I have to work 4 hours to get a certain look, I can do it in 1 hour with steroids. Plus, even look better than if, you know, you get to a point where you can't really look any better, but the steroids keep adding muscle and muscle, and most people don't know the reason how the steroids came to be. I wrestle in Japan a lot, and the steroid, and in Japan they use it for the Kobe cattle, and they shoot these cattle. All they do is stand in a pen like this, and they shoot them all day long with steroids, and then they massage them so that their muscles aren't too stiff, and they make terrifically muscled cattle, which makes great meat. And that's what the steroids they originally intended it for.
And now they're completely abused.
Yeah, now the athletes. So let me get back. I transgress a little. The steroids I first realized were taking was a few of the wrestlers. They didn't know what they were doing, but they looked a lot bigger quickly. Not so much more muscular, because they didn't really know that you really had to work out with them. They just thought you take them and you get muscular. But if you take steroids, you have to work out with them. But it also works twice as fast to make muscles, or to make them evident.
Right.
So the wrestlers that I know, say 30 years ago, that's the first time I ever knew of them. All of them died.
The wrestlers died?
All of them. And I only knew wrestlers that took it. I'm sure many other people. But the ones 30 years ago have all succumbed. They've died. They've passed away because their hearts went boom. And some of them, their head should have gone boom too. But what it does, your muscles, the heart's a muscle, and it doesn't affect it as much. It's not the same type of muscle as the muscles in your arms and legs, but it's still a muscle, and it'll build up and get a little larger, and then it can only reach, your heart can only go so big, and they just blow up. And their minds are the most things they lose. First, they lose their minds, not in the sense that they're schizophrenic, but in the sense that they actually think they're the world's most built or the most.
And they want to continue to get bigger and better.
Bigger and bigger and bigger. And then since then, I've read time after time, the football players in the NFL now are right on that edge where they started taking them about 25 years ago, and they're having all the trouble with these guys now that are in that little peak there. And then as it goes along, it'll just keep rolling over.
In your profession, the fans obviously play a big part, and I can remember an incident, I think it was in 1980 at Chicago's International Amphitheater, where a fan in the second balcony actually fired shots into the ring because he was so mad that his favorite tag team had lost. How do you feel about the fans?
Oh, the fans I'm glad they pay their money to get there, because it made me a lot of money through the year. See, everybody will come up and say, gee whiz, Bruiser, you big dummy, don't you wish you were wrestling just starting today? I said, no, I've been the top money maker in the world, one of the top 10 for 35 years. And I still continue to make as much as 90% of the wrestlers today. I said, no, but the reason I made so much money was I always wrestled Chicago, New York City, Miami, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Detroit, St. Louis, Indianapolis, always the biggest, and I was always paid on a percentage. So if they drew in those days $20,000, I still made $2,000. I made 10% of the game. I'd make $2,000, so I'd make anywhere up to $10,000, $15,000 a week sometimes.
So Dick the Bruiser, Hulk Hogan aside, can an average wrestler, there are many more that aren't the stars of the sport, can the average wrestler make a decent salary?
Oh, well, certainly there's some of these fellows with the makeup and should be in the hoochie coochie shows. I'll bet you they make 50 to 100,000 a year, whereas in my day, see, that would be the difference. I'd say the top men now make about what the top men did, only they don't work quite as often. I have worked quite a bit.
You worked, what, 4 or 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week?
I'd work almost 7 days a week when I was really at the very peak of my career. And the peak of my performances, I'd work 6, 7, 8. Sometimes in Canada, I'd wrestle two times a day.
So when you travel that much, you're so close to your family. You have 2 children, Carl and Michelle. You're very close to them, close to your wife. When you travel so much, how did you make sure that wasn't interrupted, that relationship?
Just like today, I flew everywhere. I flew. In fact, it's easier today than it was then. Not because of flying, but because of driving. I don't even bother to take a plane to Chicago. I can get from here to where I wrestle in Chicago in 3 hours. Well, if I take a plane from here to Chicago, which I did for years and years and years and years, it'd take me about 5 hours because I had to go to the airport and fly to the other airport. Then from that airport, an hour and a half back down to the amphitheater. It's most places, anything over 250 miles, I fly anymore. But if it's under 250 miles, I drive and I get there on the super highways faster than I can. And if I fly, I'm only gone a day to 2 days the most. So I'm home most of the time.
So how did the kids react to your profession when they were growing up? They're grown now, but how was it for them back when they were in school? Dad was just dad?
That's right.
Your mother was a Democratic National Committee woman, so you grew up around politics. Did that in any way, shape, or form shape your life, shape your career?
Well, I'm sure it did, Karen. My mother was a very positive person and was way ahead of her time. She was the first lady to run for Congress in the state of Indiana against Congressman Halleck, the toughest, the longest, the most ferocious, vicious Republican that ever lived, and my mother ran against him and almost beat him. My mother was head of the probation department in Indiana under both terms of Governor Schricker. She was way ahead of her time, and then she became the Democratic National Committee woman for years and years in Indiana. So my mother shaped my career by giving me this positive force to go ahead, don't be afraid of anything. And I really followed in her footsteps, although she never once told me what to do.
Never once.
That's right.
You've been known to visit hospitals not because you're obligated to do so, but because you want to do so. And I read a story where you visited a VA hospital and you said you didn't feel depressed, like most people say they do, that you felt that the guys really reacted to you and could relate to you. Is that one of the best parts of being who you are, that you can really touch people just by giving them an autograph or visiting them?
Let me tell you a story. I love veterans because they served in wars, and I didn't. And how I got to play football was I went to University of Nevada and joined the ROTC, and I was a very good student, and I became in the top 10% of the ROTC class, and I was able to receive a regular Army commission. Well, at that time, the Korean War was on, and I went to play with Green Bay, and I held this Army commission. And several times, about 3 times while I was with Green Bay, I was called on active duty. And the Green Bay draft board kept me around because I was a low profile, not because I was the greatest football player in the world. I was low profile tackle and guard. Now, we had some quarterbacks and halfbacks and all-American center linebackers that had to go. They released them and let them, they held kind of positions like I did in the Army and Navy, and they made them go. But the draft board kept me right at Green Bay in the line there in the trenches, and after several times, why the Army took away my commission. Well, everything worked out. I never had to go to active duty, never got hurt in the Army. So I always felt, you know, gee, I kind of cheated. So I owe the government something. So my way of repaying what this land's given me is I go see all the veterans. And when I go there, the ones that have injuries, physical injuries, why I don't relate to them, and they see me come, they, oh, look at that big dummy coming here, and you know, and I would be the same way. I wouldn't want to see somebody coming and think I have to talk to him when I've got a broken arm or broken leg or my neck's twisted or I've got a bad back. I wouldn't want to do that. And I've done it for years, and I finally figured that out. Gee, why do these people wince when I come by? You know, because they know what if I was sick, I certainly wouldn't want to see me. So I decided from now on I'm going to depend on going to the more or less the mental hospitals of the Veterans Association. So I visit the people that have dependency on things, you know, substance abuse, dope, different kinds, or alcohol abuse. I get in there with them, and boy, they can relate to me, or mental retardation, or they're mentally unbalanced. I don't care how I was telling my wife yesterday, came up talking to somebody just a couple days ago, and that person hadn't said boo to anybody, but that's the way it is at the mental hospitals, even at Central State. I go there. They won't talk to anybody, and they're just quiet and catatonic. I believe that's the name. till they see me, and somehow they relate to me.
You get through to them.
And I make some of them talk that haven't said a word or blinked an eye for a year, and I can get to them. So that's what I do if I have a chance.